The sun over the wide, rolling prairie was like a great golden coin, warming the wooden buildings of the small town and the people who walked its dusty main street. It was a Sunday, and the sound of the church bell had just faded into the quiet of the afternoon. Families spilled out from the white-painted church doors, the women in their simple, best dresses and the men in their sturdy, clean shirts. Among them was a young woman named Billie who walked with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. To anyone watching, she seemed a picture of calm, but inside her heart felt heavy as a stone. Billie was 19 years old, and in a place where life was built on family and land, she was beginning to feel as though she had been left behind. Billie was not the kind of girl who stood out in a crowd of chatter and laughter. She had a quiet way about her, with observant eyes that noticed when a horse was favoring its leg or when a newly planted seedling needed more water. She was practical and strong, having grown up on her father's ranch, knowing how to mend a fence, bake a loaf of bread, and tend to a sick lamb with equal skill. Her parents loved her deeply, and they were proud of the woman she had become, a woman of good character and a simple, steady faith in God. But as the seasons turned, Billie watched the other young women her age. She saw them receive bouquets of wildflowers from smiling young men. She listened as they shared whispered secrets about courtships, their cheeks turning pink with excitement. She stood by and smiled bravely as one by one, her friends were married in that very church, starting their own lives and families. No young man in town had ever asked to court Billie. It wasn't that they were unkind to her, they would tip their hats and call out a good morning. But their eyes never lingered. Their conversations never went beyond the weather or the price of grain. They seemed to look right through her, as if she were a piece of the landscape, a familiar fence post or a reliable old tree, and not a young woman with a heart full of dreams waiting to unfold. She began to wonder if there was something wrong with her. Was she too plain? Too quiet? Did she not laugh loudly enough at their jokes? The loneliness wrapped around her like a chilly fog, even on the sunniest of days. She prayed each night, asking God to guide her path, to show her where she belonged, and to grant her the patience to wait for His plan. On the other side of the churchyard, standing almost hidden in the shadow of a large oak tree, was a young man named Chester. He was 22 years old, but he carried himself with the weary posture of someone much older. Chester owned a small, struggling farm on the outskirts of town, a piece of land he had inherited after his parents passed away. The farm was rough and untamed, much like the reputation the town had unfairly given him. The people in town did not understand Chester. He was a man of few words, not because he had nothing to say, but because he found more comfort in the sounds of the wind and the honest work of his own two hands than in idle chatter. Years before, a misunderstanding had taken root in the town like a stubborn weed. A valuable tool had gone missing from the blacksmith's shop, and Chester, who had been in town that day to buy nails, was the easiest one to blame. He had been too nervous to defend himself properly, his words getting tangled and stuck when everyone stared at him. The tool was later found, but the shadow of suspicion never fully left him. People started calling him slow and strange. They would whisper that he was bad luck, that his quiet nature was a sign of a sly or dishonest character. Mothers would tell their children not to wander near his land, and the other cowboys would rarely include him in their conversations or their work. He was, for all intents and purposes, the cowboy nobody wanted. But Chester had watched Billie from afar for a long time. He saw the gentle way she handled animals. He noticed how she always helped the older women carry their baskets home from the general store. He saw the sincere kindness in her eyes when she spoke to anyone, and he thought she was the most wonderful person he had ever seen. While others saw a man who was an outcast, Chester saw a woman who was overlooked, and in his heart he felt they were two lonely pieces of a puzzle that might just fit together. For months he had wrestled with the idea, his courage failing him time and time again. But that Sunday, watching her walk with her parents, something shifted inside him. A verse from the sermon that morning echoed in his mind, "God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." He took a deep, shaky breath, said a silent prayer of his own, and stepped out from the shadow of the oak tree. The crowd seemed to part as Chester made his way across the churchyard. The friendly chatter dipped into a curious silence as people noticed where he was heading. He walked with a determined step, his work-roughened hands clenched at his sides, his gaze fixed on Billie and her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Miller turned as he approached, their expressions a mixture of surprise and caution. Chester stopped before them, his hat in his hands, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. He looked directly at Billie's father, his voice low but clear, carrying in the quiet that had fallen around them. "Mr. Miller," Chester began, his words careful and deliberate. My name is Chester. I know I don't have much to offer. My farm is small and my name doesn't mean much in this town. But I am a hard worker. I believe in being honest and doing right by my neighbors. And I would be honored, sir, more honored than I can say, if you would grant me permission to properly court your daughter, Billie. A collective, soft gasp seemed to ripple through the people standing close enough to hear. Billie felt her own heart leap into her throat. She looked at Chester, truly looked at him, perhaps for the very first time. She saw the nervous sweat on his brow, but she also saw the unwavering sincerity in his clear, honest eyes. She saw a man who was risking the greatest humiliation, putting his heart on display for the entire town to see, all for a chance. She saw past the worn-out boots and the simple clothes and saw a person who, just like her, was longing for a connection. Mr. Miller was a fair and thoughtful man. He looked from Chester's anxious face to his daughter's startled one. He knew the gossip, but he also knew that Chester had always paid his debts on time and had never been caught in a lie. He valued a man's character over the chatter of a crowd. He placed a hand on his wife's arm and then turned his attention to Billie. "This is not a decision your mother and I can make for you, Billie," he said, his voice firm but kind. "The choice to accept or decline this offer of courtship belongs to you, and you alone." All eyes were on Billie. She could feel the weight of the town's judgment, their surprise and their pity. She knew her friends were thinking she was desperate, that she was agreeing to court the cowboy nobody wanted, because she had no other options. But in that moment, looking into Chester's hopeful, vulnerable eyes, Billie did not see an outcast. She saw a man with a good heart who was being treated unfairly. Her faith told her to love thy neighbor, and her own lonely heart understood his. She thought of the story of David, who was the smallest and least likely of his brothers, yet was chosen by God for a great purpose. She felt a strange and sudden sense of peace, as if this was the path she had been praying for all along. She met her father's gaze and gave a small, confident nod. Then she turned to Chester, a gentle smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "Thank you for your offer, Chester," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying in the quiet churchyard. "I would be happy to accept your courtship." The silence broke into a wave of murmurs and whispers. Chester's shoulders, which had been held so stiff with tension, relaxed. The gratitude that shone in his eyes was brighter than the prairie sun. He had been given a chance, the first real chance anyone had given him in a very long time. And Billie, walking away from the church with her parents, felt the heavy stone of loneliness in her heart begin to crumble away, replaced by the fluttering, uncertain, but hopeful feeling of a new beginning, a story that was only just beginning to be written. The news of Billie Miller's acceptance of Chester's courtship spread through the small town with the speed and force of a summer storm. It was the primary topic of conversation over supper tables and across fence lines for days. Some folks shook their heads in pity for the Miller family, believing their daughter had lowered herself to a station from which she could never rise. Others, with a more charitable view, simply hoped the quiet young man would not break Billie's kind heart. But within the Miller household, a different atmosphere had taken root. Mr. Miller had laid down a firm and simple rule: the courtship would be conducted with the utmost propriety. Chester was always welcome at their home, but he and Billie would never be left entirely alone. Their time together would be spent in the open, under the watchful and loving eyes of her family. And so, Chester began his regular visits. Every Tuesday and Friday evening after his day's work was done, he would make the long walk from his isolated farm to the Miller's comfortable ranch house. He always arrived clean, his hair still damp from washing at the pump, his one good shirt carefully brushed. He was a picture of respectful determination. The first few visits were filled with a nervous silence that stretched between them, punctuated only by the polite questions from Billie's mother about the weather or the health of his livestock. Billie, for her part, felt a shyness she had not expected. She had made her choice out of principle and compassion, but now she was faced with the reality of building a connection with this near stranger. Their conversations began in the safe, shared space of the front porch, sitting in rocking chairs with a good 3 feet of wooden planks between them. At first they spoke of simple, safe things. Chester told her about a family of foxes he had observed near his creek, describing the playful antics of the kits with a quiet wonder that made Billie smile. Billie talked about the challenges of a new bread recipe and the satisfaction of seeing the loaves rise golden and perfect in the oven. She soon discovered that Chester's silence was not emptiness but depth. He listened to her with his whole being, his thoughtful eyes on her face, making her feel that her every word was important. He did not offer empty flattery or boastful stories like the other young men might have. His words were few, but they were always true. As the weeks turned into months, the seasons began their slow turn. The lush green of late summer bled into the fiery gold and red of autumn. Chester's visits became the steady rhythm of Billie's life, something she found herself looking forward to with a growing sense of anticipation. One crisp October afternoon, he arrived not in the evening, but in the daylight of a Saturday, having first secured permission from her father. He asked if Billie would like to see his farm. Mrs. Miller packed a basket with a hearty lunch, and Mr. Miller hitched up the wagon, insisting on driving them himself. It was not a suggestion but a statement of the rules that would be kept. The journey to Chester's land was a revelation. Billie had heard the talk of his run-down patch of weeds, but what she saw was a property in the midst of a slow and determined transformation. The fields, while not vast, were neatly plowed, the dark earth turned and ready for a winter rest. The old barn, which had once listed to one side like a tired old man, now stood straight and solid, its new wood a bright yellow against the weathered gray of the original structure. Chester spoke not of the work itself but of his plans. He pointed to a sunny spot near the house where he intended to put in a large kitchen garden come spring. He showed her the strong, clear water from his well. He did not apologize for what the farm was not. He shared his quiet vision for what it could be. It was on this visit that he led her to a magnificent oak tree that stood sentinel near the boundary of his property. Its branches were wide and strong, its leaves a canopy of bronze and copper. "This is my favorite tree on the whole place," Chester said, his hand resting gently on the rough bark. "It's been here through droughts and blizzards and it never fails to put out new leaves. It's a strong tree. A reliable one." He looked at her and for a fleeting moment, Billie felt he was speaking about more than just the oak. "I'm saving this wood for something important," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Billie simply nodded, storing the moment away in her heart, a curious and precious piece of the puzzle that was Chester. The courtship continued through the shortening days of autumn and into the quiet chill of winter. Visits moved from the porch to the warmth of the miller's parlor, where Chester would sit by the fire, often with a small piece of wood and a carving knife in his hand. He would whittle away, creating little figures of birds or rabbits for the Miller children from a neighboring farm, while he and Billie talked. Their conversations began to touch on deeper things. They spoke of their shared faith, of the sermons they heard on Sundays, and how they tried to live those lessons through the week. Chester confessed how lonely his life had been and how the town's coldness had sometimes tested his belief in the goodness of people. Billie shared her own loneliness, her feeling of being invisible, and how her prayers for purpose had led her to say yes to him that day in the churchyard. It was during a cold, clear night in late January, with a million stars glittering like ice chips in the black sky above, that Chester arrived for his visit looking more solemn than usual. He and Billie were sitting in the parlor, the fire crackling warmly. Her mother was mending a sock in a chair nearby, giving them the illusion of privacy while maintaining a watchful presence. Chester set his whittling aside and turned to Billie. He didn't get down on one knee, but the intensity in his gaze made Billie's breath catch in her throat. "Billie," he began, his voice low and steady, "when I asked to court you, I was hoping for a chance. I was hoping to show you that I could be a good man. These past months with you have been the best of my life. You've seen me for who I am, and you've treated me with a kindness I won't ever forget." He paused, gathering his words. "My farm is still small. My name still doesn't carry much weight in this town. But my love for you is the truest thing I've ever known. I promise to work every day of my life to be a husband you can be proud of, to build a home filled with faith and kindness. Billie Miller, would you do me the greatest honor and become my wife?" Tears welled in Billie's eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. She did not need to think or pray for guidance in this moment. The answer had been growing in her heart with every shared silence, every quiet laugh, every glimpse of his steadfast character. She saw the man he was, a man of integrity, resilience, and deep, abiding love. The opinions of the town, the whispers, the pity, it all faded into insignificance. She placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses that spoke of hard work and determination. "Yes, Chester," she said, her voice clear and sure. "1,000 times yes." A smile broke across Chester's face, a true, full smile that lit up his whole countenance and made him look years younger. Mrs. Miller, who had been pretending very hard to focus on her mending, let out a soft, happy sigh. The courtship was over. A new chapter, the promise of a life built together, was about to begin. The weeks that followed the engagement were a whirlwind of simple, heartfelt preparations. There was no grand party or fancy trousseau to assemble, for both Billie and Chester understood that their union was not about a display for the town, but a covenant before God and each other. Billie's mother and a few of the kinder ladies from the church gathered to help her sew a new dress, not a white one, for such fabric was impractical and costly, but a lovely, soft blue wool that would serve as her best dress for many winters to come. The conversations around the sewing circle were warm and full of well wishes, the initial shock of the engagement having softened into a quiet acceptance among those who truly knew Billie. Chester, meanwhile, worked with a renewed, almost feverish intensity on his farm. He whitewashed the walls of the small farmhouse until they gleamed in the weak winter sun. He built a sturdy new table and 2 chairs from seasoned pine, sanding the surfaces until they were smooth as silk, ensuring his bride would have a proper place to sit and take her meals. The wedding day dawned bright and cold, the frost painting delicate, lace-like patterns on the window panes of the little white church. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Billie's family, a handful of close neighbors, and a few curious onlookers who came more out of a sense of spectacle than celebration. But as Billie walked down the short aisle on her father's arm, her gaze fixed on Chester standing tall and solemn at the front, the faces of the crowd blurred into insignificance. Chester wore a new shirt, his hands clenched nervously at his sides, but when he saw her, his entire being seemed to relax into a look of such profound awe and devotion that a soft murmur of approval rippled through the congregation. The pastor spoke not of earthly riches or social standing, but of the biblical foundations of marriage, of love that is patient and kind, of a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared faith in the Lord. When Chester placed the simple, polished band of silver on Billie's finger, his voice was clear and strong as he repeated his vows, promising to love and cherish her for better for worse till death parted them. After a small, joyful celebration at the Miller Ranch, featuring a cake baked by Billie's mother and hearty wishes for their future, Chester helped his new wife into the wagon that now held her modest trunk of belongings. He drove them not to the rundown farm she had first visited, but to a home that was waiting for her. He carried her over the threshold of the freshly painted farmhouse, and Billie caught her breath. It was spotless and warm, smelling of beeswax and baking bread. A fire crackled in the hearth, and on the new table sat a small wild winter berry bouquet in a jar. He had thought of everything. Their first evening as husband and wife was quiet, filled with a contented peace as they sat by the fire, learning the new rhythm of sharing a space, of being a family. Life settled into a new and satisfying routine. Billie brought a woman's touch to the farmhouse, hanging simple curtains and arranging her few cherished possessions. She took charge of the kitchen, and soon the house was always filled with the comforting smells of simmering stew and fresh-baked pies. She worked alongside Chester in the mornings, feeding the chickens and tending the kitchen garden he had prepared for her, her presence bringing a light and laughter to the land that it had never known. In the afternoons, while she mended clothes or preserved food, Chester would often disappear into a small, shed-like building at the back of the property that he used as his workshop. He would be gone for an hour or 2 each evening, returning only when the light had faded completely from the sky. At first, Billie thought little of it. A farm always had an endless list of repairs. Tools needed fixing, harnesses needed mending, and fences required constant attention. She trusted her husband completely. But as the weeks turned into months, the pattern became as regular as the setting sun. He would finish his supper, thank her kindly, and with a soft, almost secretive smile say, "I'll be in the workshop for a spell if you don't mind." He never invited her to see what he was working on, and he never brought anything out. He never seemed to be repairing farm equipment, for those tasks he did out in the open yard. This was something different, something private. She would sometimes hear not the bang of a hammer, but the steady rhythmic scrape of a plane or the gentle tap-tap-tap of a small mallet. Curiosity began to bloom within her, a tiny, persistent bud. What could he be building in there that took so many hours and required such secrecy? One afternoon, a woman from town, Mrs. Gable, came by to deliver some sewing thread Billie had ordered. She was a woman known for having a long tongue and a short memory for kindness. She looked around the neat, clean kitchen with a critical eye. "My, you've done wonders with this old place, Billie," she remarked, though her tone held no warmth. "It's quite cozy. A simple life for a simple man, I suppose. It's a blessing you came along when you did. Poor Chester, all alone out here with no prospects and that cloud hanging over him. Well, it's a good thing you were willing to look past all that. Some folks said you were settling, but I see you've made the best of it." The words, delivered with a false smile, struck Billie with the force of a physical blow. Long after Mrs. Gable had left, the phrase "settling" echoed in her mind. It tapped into that old, buried feeling of being an afterthought, of being the girl no one else wanted, marrying the man no one else wanted. A cold, thin sliver of doubt, the first she had felt since their wedding day, wedged itself into her heart. Had she simply made the best of a limited choice? Was this quiet, isolated life all there was? That evening, when Chester excused himself to his workshop, the closed door felt like a symbol of a part of him she could not reach, a secret he was keeping from her. The gentle scraping sounds from the shed, once a harmless background noise, now seemed to mock her. That night, after Chester had come inside and they had prepared for bed, Billie lay awake in the dark. The doubt gnawed at her. She thought of the strong, silent man sleeping beside her, of his unwavering kindness, of the love she truly felt for him. She thought of the town's whispers and how she had vowed never to listen to them. She had let the careless words of a busy woman poison her peace. Tears of shame pricked her eyes. She slipped out of bed and onto her knees, folding her hands and bowing her head in the moonlight that streamed through the window. She prayed not for answers about the workshop but for strength. She asked God to fortify her heart against doubt, to renew her trust in the good man she had married, and to protect the love they had built from the poison of outside opinions. A sense of calm slowly returned to her, the doubt receding like a tide. She resolved then and there to trust her husband, and to wait for him to share his secret in his own time. The very next day, emboldened by her renewed faith, she decided to take him a cool drink of water in the middle of the afternoon, something she rarely did, respecting his private time. The door to the workshop was slightly ajar. She pushed it open gently, the sunlight spilling into the dusty space behind her. Chester was standing with his back to her, bent over his workbench, so focused on his task he had not heard her approach. And then she saw it. There, on the bench, was a cradle. But it was not just any cradle. It was a piece of artistry, carved from the rich, golden wood of the great oak tree he had shown her. The headboard was intricately carved with a design of twisting vines and little songbirds, their details exquisite and delicate. The wood was sanded to a smooth, satiny finish, and it gleamed in the shaft of sunlight. He was carefully polishing the curved rockers, his big work-roughened hands moving with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to Billie's eyes. He must have sensed her presence, for he slowly turned around. He did not look startled or angry. Instead, he looked at her with an expression of pure, hopeful love, his eyes shimmering in the workshop's dim light. He gestured to the beautiful object between them. "I'm building this for our future," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been since the day you said yes." In that single breathtaking moment, every doubt, every whisper, every flicker of fear was utterly obliterated. The secret was not one of shame but of sacred hope. He had not been hiding from her. He had been building a prayer, a physical manifestation of his faith in her, in their love, and in the family they would one day become. The cradle was his silent, steadfast promise, made of oak and love, and it was more precious to Billie than any treasure in the world. The discovery of the cradle transformed the atmosphere within the little farmhouse, infusing it with a new and profound sense of shared purpose. The secret was out, and in its place bloomed a quiet, joyful conspiracy between husband and wife. The workshop was no longer a place of mystery but a sanctuary of hope. Billie would often sit on a stool near the door, mending clothes or shelling peas, simply to be near Chester as he put the final loving touches on the cradle. He showed her his progress, his rough fingers tracing the delicate carvings of the vines and birds he had created. He explained how he had chosen the strongest, most beautifully grained piece from the heart of the oak tree, wanting only the best for such an important purpose. In these moments, Billie understood the full depth of her husband's character. While other men might have spoken grandly of their dreams, Chester had chosen to build his, silently and steadfastly, trusting in God's timing and plan. The cradle was not just a piece of furniture. It was a testament to his faith, a physical prayer that had been taking shape even during the loneliest days of their courtship. With the coming of spring, the entire farm seemed to echo this new life burgeoning within their hearts. The fields Chester had so carefully plowed now boasted straight, green rows of young crops. The kitchen garden Billie tended burst with the promise of peas, carrots, and potatoes. The farm was no longer just a patch of land he was desperately trying to tame. It was a thriving, productive homestead, a testament to their combined hard work and dedication. The change did not go unnoticed by the townsfolk. Men who had once scoffed at Chester's methods now tipped their hats respectfully when they saw him at the general store, noting the quality of his grain and the health of his livestock. Women who had pitied Billie now asked her for advice on their own preserves, seeing the neatness of her home and the obvious contentment on her face. The cloud of suspicion and gossip that had followed Chester for years began to dissipate, replaced by a dawning respect for the quiet, diligent man and his capable wife. It was on a warm morning in late spring, with the world outside awash in every shade of green, that Billie knew with a deep, intuitive certainty that the cradle's purpose was soon to be fulfilled. A strange tiredness had come over her for several days, followed by a feeling that was both thrilling and terrifying. She shared her suspicion with Chester that evening, her voice barely a whisper. The look that crossed his face was one of pure, unadulterated wonder, as if he were witnessing his very first miracle. From that day forward, he treated her with an even more tender care, taking on the heaviest of her chores himself and always ensuring she had a comfortable place to rest. Their evening prayers together took on a new, fervent quality, filled with gratitude and petitions for health and safe delivery. The months of her confinement passed in a slow, sweet rhythm. The finished cradle was brought in from the workshop and placed in a corner of their bedroom, where the morning sun would touch it. It stood as a daily reminder of the blessing to come, its polished wood glowing in the soft light. Billie spent hours sewing tiny garments from soft, worn-out dresses, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it sometimes took her breath away. Chester was her constant support, his steady presence a calm anchor through her moments of fear and uncertainty. He would read to her from the Bible in the evenings, his voice steady and sure, the ancient stories of faith and promise filling their small home. They decided on a name, choosing David, after the shepherd boy chosen by God, a name that symbolized a faith that could overcome any giant, just as their love had overcome the giant of other people's judgment. The summer heat had reached its peak when the time finally came. One evening, as the fireflies began their nightly dance over the fields, the first pains began. Chester, his face pale but his hands steady, hitched the wagon and raced to town to fetch the doctor and a kind, experienced midwife from the church. The journey back felt like an eternity, every second stretching into an hour. When they arrived, Billie was settled in their room, surrounded by the soft light of lanterns and the comforting presence of the midwife. Chester waited in the main room, pacing the floorboards, his prayers a continuous, silent murmur. The sounds from the bedroom were sounds of intense effort and pain, and each one felt like a physical blow to him. He had faced down stubborn bulls and brutal winters, but he had never felt so utterly powerless. He clutched the back of the new chair he had built, his knuckles white, his faith being tested in the fiery crucible of fear and hope. Then, after what seemed like a lifetime, a new sound cut through the night. It was a strong, healthy cry, a powerful wail that announced a new soul had entered the world. The door to the bedroom opened and the midwife appeared, her face wreathed in a tired but brilliant smile. "You can come in now, Chester," she said softly. "You have a son." He walked into the room as if stepping onto holy ground. Billie lay against the pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiant with a joy so pure it outshone the lantern light. And in her arms, swaddled in a soft, white blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby. He had a fuzz of dark hair and his little face was still scrunched from the effort of his birth. Chester approached slowly, sinking to his knees beside the bed, his eyes overflowing with tears he made no effort to hide. He reached out a trembling finger and his son's tiny hand curled around it with a surprising strength. After a few moments, Billie nodded towards the cradle. With the utmost care, as if handling the most fragile and precious treasure, Chester lifted his son from his mother's arms. He cradled the baby against his broad chest, feeling the incredible lightness and warmth of him. He then walked the 2 steps to the oak cradle, the very symbol of his hope and faith. He bent down and gently, so gently, placed the baby David into the bed that had been made for him with so much love and anticipation. The baby stirred for a moment, his cries softening to a contented gurgle as he settled into the smooth, curved wood. Looking at his son lying in the cradle he had built with his own hands, and then at his wife, whose love had redeemed his lonely life, Chester felt a completion so overwhelming it shook him to his core. The promise had been kept. The prayer had been answered. Their family was now complete, a tiny, perfect testament to the power of faith, patience, and a love that the world had once thought was not enough. The change that little David brought to the small farm on the prairie was a change not of landscape, but of spirit. The very air seemed to hum with a new, gentle music, the soft gurgles and coos of a contented baby, the low, rumbling lullabies Chester would sing as he rocked the cradle with his foot, the happy, tired sighs of a mother watching her world sleep. The oak cradle, once a secret symbol of hope, now became the heart of the home, its gentle rocking a constant rhythm in their days and nights. Billie discovered a new, fierce kind of love that flowed from her as naturally as breath, a love that found joy in the smallest of things, in the way David's tiny fingers curled around her own, in the sweet, milky scent of his skin, in the peaceful expression on his face as he slept in the bed his father had so lovingly carved. Chester, who had once measured his worth in bushels of grain and sturdy fences, now found his greatest pride in being able to make his son stop crying by simply holding him against his shoulder, his large, work-worn hand spanning the baby's entire back. As the seasons turned once more, the farm continued to flourish, its prosperity a quiet testament to their shared labor. The townsfolk who had once watched them with pity or suspicion, now saw them as they truly were, a pillar of the community. Chester's honest dealings and quiet reliability made him a sought-after hand for community projects, while Billie's gentle wisdom and steadfast faith made her a comfort to other young mothers and families in need. They no longer defined themselves by the harsh words once spoken about them, for those words had been washed away by the tides of truth and time, replaced by a hard-earned respect. People began to remember not the misunderstood young man, but the dependable farmer. They saw not the overlooked young woman, but the strong and gracious wife and mother. The story of Chester and Billie became a different kind of story, one whispered not in mockery, but as a quiet lesson in not judging a book by its cover, and in trusting that God often writes the most beautiful stories for those the world forgets. One evening, with the golden light of a late summer sunset spilling through their window, Chester came in from his chores. He washed his hands and face at the basin and walked over to the cradle where David was just waking from his nap. The baby looked up at his father, his calm eyes, so like Chester's, blinking slowly. Chester reached down and lifted his son high into the air, eliciting a delighted giggle that filled the entire room. Billie stood by the table watching them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She looked at her husband, his face transformed by a joyful, open smile that was now a common sight, and then at her son, the living, breathing answer to so many prayers. In that moment she saw the complete picture of their journey. The loneliness, the doubt, the whispered judgments, it had all been worth it. It had led them here, to this perfect, ordinary, miraculous moment. Chester brought David over to the window, pointing out at the land that was now their legacy. The sturdy oak tree stood strong in the distance, its leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. "That's your land too, son," Chester murmured, his voice a soft rumble. "One day you'll understand how God can take a seed of hope and grow a whole forest from it." He then turned and looked at Billie, his gaze encompassing both her and their child. "This is my forever," he said simply, and in those 3 words he said everything. He spoke of his unwavering love for her, his profound gratitude for their son, and his absolute faith in the future they would continue to build together, guided by the hand of the Lord. Billie came to stand beside them, slipping her hand into Chester's free one. Together, the 3 of them watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The cradle, sitting silent and beautiful in the corner, was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a monument. A monument to a promise kept, to a faith that never wavered, and to a love that the world had once thought was not enough, but which had proven to be more than enough to build a whole, wonderful life upon. Their forever after was not a fairy tale ending, but a blessed beginning, a daily choice to love, to trust, and to build, side by side and in hand, for all the days that God would grant them. If this story of quiet faith and enduring love touched your heart, consider joining our community for more tales that celebrate the timeless values of kindness, redemption, and God's grace. Your support helps us share these important lessons with others. Subscribe to our channel for new stories every week, and let us continue this journey of faith and inspiration together.